Hello and welcome to another episode of Get Used to It, a public interest show in which we talk about issues of interest to gay and lesbian people. We're happy to say that we're now seen system-wide on Century Cable, which you probably know because you're watching us, which is usually either Channel 10 or Channel 14, and yours is one of 167,000 households that we've invaded, so congratulations. Our topic today is the Colorado amendment that was passed by initiative in the last election, limiting the rights of gay and lesbian people in terms of their civil rights. And I have three guests today that are going to tell you a lot about this, as well as taking you to visit the Creating Change Conference, where we talked to some other people who had some opinions and information about the initiative. My guests today are Mary Newcombe, who is the staff attorney at the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund here in Los Angeles. And a little bit later in the show, we'll be introducing you to David Smith, who's the executive director of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, also here in Los Angeles, and David Bender, who's the vice president of operations for Wapello County Productions, which, as you probably know, belongs to Roseanne and Tom Arnold. And they're going to talk about the sort of boycott, anti-boycott points of view. But first, we're going to get Mary to tell us sort of what all of this is about. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks. Maybe you can tell the people watching, first of all, how is it we had rights in Colorado that were taken away? I mean, a lot of us think we don't have any rights at all, and a lot of us think we have all the rights, both of which are quite wrong, I guess.
Well, Sheila, that's a broad question. There's a number of rights that we have as individuals that we have the right to seek legislation on our own behalf. We have the right to cast votes and try to elect people who represent us and will do things in our own favor. And we have the right to do to try to avoid irrational discrimination against us in many, many venues. We also have the right, and specifically in Colorado, we had seen the governor sign into law an executive order that banned public employment discrimination against gays and lesbians. We had seen the cities of Denver, Aspen, and Boulder also adopt legislation barring discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. In addition, we had seen a number of public agencies, school districts, et cetera, adopt similar policies and guidelines, all of which were looking to protect and eradicate discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation.
So when people talk about gays and lesbians having rights, what we really mean is we think that we shouldn't be discriminated against. But the truth is, a law has to be passed, in essence, to keep people from discriminating against us, right? In other words, nothing would keep anybody from firing me from my job for being queer, for instance, if there weren't a law in place to say that they couldn't do it.
That's true. In most cases, an employer can fire someone at will unless there is a law banning discrimination on the basis of that aspect, that characteristic. However, I want to make a point. It's not a question of creating special rights for certain people. What it is a question is of making the playing field level. In our society, we know that there are certain characteristics that are viewed with prejudice in our society. And traditionally, race has been a characteristic that has resulted in some people being treated differently and being denied employment, being denied housing. Sexual orientation, conversely, especially with respect to homosexual orientation, has been looked with prejudice and stereotypes by society. And consequently, there's a lot of, in many, many circumstances, we'll see discrimination take place on that basis that has formerly not been protected under any particular law. But what we want to see is not special rights, is to create a level playing field for all persons.
So when you use the term special rights, I know that this was a term that was used by the people who were pushing this initiative and this amendment in Colorado. So maybe let's talk a little bit about it. What did the proposed amendment, the one that was passed by the vote of the people of the state of Colorado, what did this proposed amendment say, and what is its effect?
Amendment 2 was adopted by 63% of the voters. Is that, can we? Okay. Amendment 2 was adopted by 53% of the voters in Colorado. Unfortunately, it is an amendment to the state constitution. Consequently, virtually every public statement in Colorado is now amended, because the Colorado Constitution is amended, state laws and city laws are also affected by that amendment. And what this amendment does is to say that lesbians and gay men and bisexuals may not seek protective legislation from local cities or from the state or from any public agencies. It also goes farther than that. What it says is that any claim of discrimination that someone might raise cannot be addressed either in the courts or through any public agencies. So consequently, it's justifying any act of discrimination that occurs by anyone in Colorado.
So what we had was, we had an executive order, we had a couple of city ordinances that were sort of, you know, hard-fought, well-won anti-discrimination laws. We had the ability to go into court on the basis of those laws and claim, to ask for equal treatment, in essence. And what this amendment did in amending the Colorado Constitution, as I think you just said, is it said, no, you cannot have those city ordinances. Those are wiped out. The executive order is void. No court has the jurisdiction to hear your case, right? So in the whole state, we can't make a claim for equality or a claim against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation.
That's correct. What the state has been arguing, and it's very disappointing to see this, but the state has been arguing that the state is now in a neutral position and is not encouraging discrimination. But we all know that when the state takes a particular group of people and deprives a particular group of people of the right to claim discrimination or to seek protective legislation and imposes special burdens on that class of people, then everyone gets it. That it's bad to be gay, that you can treat homosexuals badly and get away with it. And that's the message that the state is sending through this amendment.
So why did the people in Colorado vote for it? I mean, don't we all have the opinion that Colorado is a very cool state, everybody's a skier and, you know, liberal, etc. Why did this pass?
I actually think that it wouldn't pass today. I think one of the very interesting things that's happened is that there's been a tremendous amount of public education just in the last month where people have begun to understand how this particular amendment operates. What it was perceived as doing initially, and this was how it was sold by the right wing, is to say that we don't hate gays and lesbians, but we don't want them to get special rights, and we certainly don't want there to be affirmative action so that we'll have to hire gays and lesbians to teach our students. Now that's a shorthand version of their message, but essentially they're playing on a lot of stereotypes about people, and they're also playing on people's fears of civil rights legislation in general. I think that one of the biggest problems for the civil rights movements, and this is not just the gay and lesbian civil rights movement, this is the civil rights movement of all people of color, religious minorities. It's the perception by those who are already perceived as the norm, and that traditionally is white,
well, the people who have
Christian.
Power characterize themselves as the normal people.
That's correct. The people who already hold power, that by enacting civil rights legislation that you're giving that power away, and that's absolutely not the case. What it does is simply saying that, look, treat us the same as you would treat anyone else, and don't deny us employment, don't deny us housing just because we're different than you are.
So people who are not gay and lesbian, who might have thought, well, maybe it's okay for them to have equal rights, were kind of fed a bill of goods by the right wing that made them think that we were getting something special, some protection that they didn't have, because they might have thought, well, I can be fired at will, you know, why can't they?
I think that actually is very frightening to people because they believe they're losing something, and actually they're not. It's just ensuring that someone who is gay or lesbian is not treated differently.
I want to talk a little bit about what's happening now in terms of the use of the law to try to change this. I know that a suit's being filed in Colorado, and actually what I'd like to do is, when we were at the Creating Change conference, we had an opportunity to talk to Jean Dubofsky, who was a Supreme Court justice in the state of Colorado and is now lead counsel for the plaintiffs who are challenging this amendment to the Constitution. We asked Jean to talk a little bit about the legal theories that were being used in the litigation.
Oh, we've had overwhelming support, absolutely remarkable support. The governor has to be the named defendant in this case because he's responsible for enforcing the Constitution. Governor has no interest really in being a defendant in this case. He's indicated many, many times that he is adamantly opposed to Amendment 2 and personally doesn't have any interest in seeing that it remains a part of the Constitution. That's aside from his responsibility as governor. The cities of Aspen, Boulder, and Denver have joined in this case as plaintiffs. They've joined on our side. And it took the mayors of those cities very little effort, I think, to line up the support of all or nearly all of the members of their city council. In fact, the Aspen city council members wanted to all be named individually as plaintiffs because they felt so strongly that they wanted to be able to retain the ordinance that they had passed. Aspen, Denver, and Boulder are involved because all of those cities had ordinances prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Then we've had support from locally based groups that have national backup programs. We've just had more volunteers than we can really even begin to manage. I think people didn't really understand it. The amendment was sold as prohibiting special affirmative programs and quotas for gays and lesbians. Well, of course, gays and lesbians don't have, nor has anyone suggested that they should have special affirmative programs and quotas in employment or housing or whatever. The amendment prohibits access to the courts and to all branches and levels of government, whether it's municipalities or school districts or the state government, for remedy of any type of discrimination against gays and lesbians. That's pretty dramatic. That's a real effort to roll back the court protections for any person who finds himself or herself discriminated against. Doesn't mean just gays and lesbians can be subject to this kind of singling out for no access to any remedy. It means if this works, then we can turn back perhaps all of our civil rights laws. It's one of the reasons I think all of the major Jewish organizations in the country, for example, are so interested in helping in this case, because they perceive that this is a real problem, not just for gays and lesbians, but for religious minorities, for people who've been persecuted in the past. The mayor of Denver is black, and he has been a leader in opposition to this amendment. And I think he understands very well that it's not very difficult if you can succeed under the federal Constitution in allowing this type of an amendment to the state Constitution, then why can't you do it in other areas? The primary constitutional claim is that the amendment violates the 14th Amendment guarantee of equal protection of the laws. There has been a precedent on that from here in California, the Riverside case, which provides a wonderful legal basis for all the claims that this ordinance, or this constitutional amendment, violates equal protection. There will also be claims, or are claims, brought under the First Amendment. Speech, religion, right to petition the government, all violated by this amendment. And then there are Republican form of government, supremacy clause, access to the court claims, and all of the local governments that are participating as plaintiffs in this action have a violation of their home rule power claims also.
As a former member of the Colorado Supreme Court, how do you think the court will go on this?
Well, I hope we win. You can't tell. It's interesting. There's so many ways in which a case could get sidetracked onto procedural grounds that aren't really central to what we want. So we're going to try real hard to keep the case focused on the major issues. And courts are arbitrary. I know that a little too well, and I guess I'm hoping that in this instance everything goes our way.
We'll hear more about the legal challenge to this amendment in Colorado in just a minute.
Bobby Griffith died at the age of 20. He didn't have a disease. He wasn't involved in gang violence or drugs. Bobby Griffith killed himself because he was gay. Bobby Griffith's mother is a good Christian woman. She didn't mean for her son to die so tragically, but like so many others, she allowed herself to believe the bigotry that led to her young son's death. Love and support your gay and lesbian children. That's what Mary Griffith would do if only she and Bobby could start over.
Welcome back to Get Used to It, where we're talking about the anti-gay and lesbian amendment that was passed in Colorado this past November. We're talking to Mary Newcombe from the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund. Gene Dubofsky, in this last clip that we saw, talked about the Riverside case that established that constitutional challenge could work in these kind of cases, and that was your case, wasn't it, Mary?
That's right.
So how does it work, and how might it work in Colorado? Sorry.
Well, we're very pleased to have Gene as our lead counsel. We're co-counsel in the Colorado case, and we've developed our expertise in this area through a challenge we brought to a similar initiative that was circulated in the city of Riverside. We were successful in convincing the city council of Riverside not to put it on the ballot, and then defended the city in court when the proponents of the initiative sought to put it back on the ballot. What we convinced the Court of Appeal and won a fantastic decision upholding the equal protection rights of lesbians and gay men was that, number one, the initiative promoted and encouraged discrimination against gay men and lesbians, and number two, put a unique burden on gays and lesbians and prevented them from going forward and trying to achieve protective legislation on their own, whereas that burden does not fall on any other group. And that decision is really the precedent that enables us to challenge around the country.
So it's sort of like the opposite of what the right wing was saying. It's like special rights not. I mean, they're taking them away rather than giving them. And so it seems like it might be confusing a little bit, but because they amended the Colorado Constitution, but it sounds as though there's other parts of the Constitution that we're using to challenge this new amendment and say that it's unconstitutional. Can you do that?
Well, you're right. It's a very good point, is that the Colorado Constitution has been amended, and that takes away from us a potential argument that the Colorado Constitution would have declared this illegal if it was in any other form. But the federal Constitution is still a limitation on all the state constitutions. That's an important argument for us. It's an important protection, and we are going to be, I think, seeing the same interpretation for the federal Constitution in the Colorado court that the California court gave us in the Riverside case.
Are there a lot of plaintiffs in this case? She made it sound as though there were several.
There are an enormous number of plaintiffs, but it helps illustrate the very wide effect of this initiative. First of all, there are a number of individual plaintiffs, some of whom have come out and are threatened with violence now. There are others who are public employees and are threatened with the loss of their job. There are people who are parents, one minister who was threatened with the loss of her civil rights. There are also, there's a local union, an SEIU union local, and there's also a school district who are going to be involved now.
As well as the cities that she mentioned.
The 3 cities who had ordinances.
Well, you know, we talked to one of the plaintiffs, Richard Evans, at the Creating Change Conference, which was incidentally sponsored by the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force and by the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center here in LA. Richard Evans, who talked about what it feels like. I mean, it's fine for all of us lawyers to run around filing, briefs and motions and things, but what it feels like to be the person who is challenging this. So we talked to Richard Evans, and here he is.
Election night was a very confusing evening. I think what happened is, and what you're going to see around the rest of the country, is that the special rights argument that they're proposing is devastating, and that people do not understand that equal protection ordinances do nothing more than give gays and lesbians the same remedies that people of color have, that women have, that the handicapped community has. They don't get it. All they see is sexual orientation, and that we are looking for some special privileges under the law. There's not an understanding that currently we're not protected by the federal Constitution. We're not protected by most states or most local municipalities, and that whenever we put that language in anywhere, it is a red flag. It's seen as, well, wait a minute, why is sexual orientation something we need to legislate for?
Who was behind this amendment?
In Colorado, it was a group called Colorado for Family Values, which grew out of a Denver group called Citizens for Sensible Right. Citizens for Sensible Right proposed the local repeal, and then when they lost, transformed themselves into Colorado for Family Values and shifted their basis to Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs is also where the national headquarters for Focus on the Family is now. There's a huge grouping of conservative businesses and organizations and networks run out of Colorado Springs, and I think that has national implication. My fear is that is that we'll start seeing this particularly in the southern states next, which are extremely conservative, and then they'll just work their way through the country, and they'll find states where there's an initiative process which favors placing an amendment on the ballot, and they'll run a stealth campaign, and even in states where there aren't currently protections for gays and lesbians, I think we're going to see these amendments appearing.
Attorneys have a sort of soft spot in their heart for plaintiffs because we always think they're like the bravest people alive. Aren't you afraid to be a plaintiff in this case?
On the one hand, I am very afraid. There have been bomb threats at the gay bars. I mean, that's not unexpected, but there's also been incidents of violence where people have gone through and vandalized vehicles in the parking lots and not taken any valuables, not gone through the cars. They've just broken out the windows as a sign that to the gay community that you're vulnerable and that we know where you are. And the bomb threats, one of the bomb threats was to a bookstore in Denver, and they called in and said, "We think you have too many gay employees and we're going to blow up your store."
While we were at the Creating Change conference, we also had the opportunity to talk to a remarkable woman, Suzanne Pharr, who is the director of the Arkansas Women's Project and a longtime theorist and activist in gay and lesbian movement, who talked to us about the connection between our movement and other movements of oppressed people, sort of the right wing's real agenda around this, and really put it in a political context for us. It was a remarkable conversation.
Their ultimate goal of the religious right is to merge church and state. And they want to do that so that in all the institutions of society that they can have this fundamentalist vision of morality and be in charge. I mean, it's a political agenda. And that fundamentalist vision is that there's actual authority given from God, who for them is a white God, to man who is white, to have power and dominion over the earth and all of its peoples. But it's dangerous for us to think that we're the only ones being attacked, because they come in, they target a group, and you're made to think, well, this is the only show in town. We're under assault, and we have to protect ourselves, and you begin to feel like you're the only people under assault, and you don't make the connections with the other people who are being systematically attacked at the same time. So that's one thing that they're doing. How this fits in is that they move to a whole new level of organizing. And this was a change for them. This is what got my interest. I've been looking at the Christian right, or religious right, for the last 10 years. But when I first saw the video that was put out by the Oregon Citizens Alliance, which was a year ago, what I recognized in that is that a couple of things. That one, that was the first time they were going to try a constitutional amendment in Oregon and in Colorado. So this was new. Then the fact they were doing it in the two states, it also caught my attention. They were going to do a national testing of their approach. And so what they did is they put together two, one more extreme than the other. Had they done just Colorado, we would have said this is one of the most terrible things that could have been done against lesbians and gay men. But they didn't do just Colorado. They took it, and then they crafted another one for Oregon, which was so extreme, outrageously extreme. So the Colorado one began to look normalized. So they pushed the right so far to the right that the middle was this horrible right thing, but was described then as middle ground.
So you see that as a strategy that they undertook, in other words?
Clear strategy. It was a package deal. And so the testing was, it was the old run them up the flagpole and see which one flies. And what flew in this case was the Colorado one that became characterized as not being so lethal, not being so terrible, being moderate, being, that normalization that began to happen with it. So it became very hard, I think, for people in Colorado to combat it with the national press, focusing particularly so much on Oregon, where it was so much more outrageous. We will not win this just on the pragmatic level, not just the moral and ethical and political level, but we will not win it on the pragmatic level unless we come to understand that we're targeted as parts of a whole, that we're part of a national agenda with the religious right, moving groups of people over to one side, marginalizing us, basically saying that we're not fit to live. It's ultimately what they say. They say this about people of color. In all groups, they talk not about supposedly who we are, but about our behavior. So the behavior of people of color for the Pharr, for the religious right, becomes these are the people who do drugs, these are the people who do crime, these are the people who abuse welfare. And you begin to say, they have this bad behavior, therefore they're bad people, therefore they don't deserve rights. They say about lesbians and gay men, these are the people who do bad sexual behavior, these are the people who sexually abuse children, these are the people who teach homosexuality in the schools and recruit children. Bad behavior means bad people don't deserve rights.
So why do you think we are the easier target now?
Because we've had a civil rights movement that has had more laws and more education put in place for people of color. The language that they used at the Republican convention was not that much off the language that was used in the late 1950s and the early 1960s when the civil rights movement was gaining momentum. Mm-hmm. The tactics, the language, the expression, the behavior of these people is similar to what was happening in at that time.
Do you see this as a backlash and kind of a measure of our success?
Of course. If we didn't have this kind of visibility, which we've actually gained very fast, 23 years since Stonewall, that if we had not had this visibility and this sense of success, we wouldn't have been attacked. So what does that mean? We should all be in the closet, that we should choose invisibility? No, absolutely not. It means that we are making a difference in terms of liberation. We're making a difference in terms of our struggles for justice and struggles for freedom. So it's time to go forward. And it's time for, I think, everybody to be out. I think that we really cannot afford to try to have, they do stealth organizing for political gain. Sometimes I think we do stealth behavior and lives, and I don't think we can do that. We've got to be public, and we've got to be who we are.
Is that the best strategy then for countering the right wing? What would you recommend to our viewers? I mean, if they want to organize and work against the right wing, what does that mean?
I think they had to organize with other groups in their communities other than gay and lesbian groups. They had to make gay and lesbian groups strong, and they had to put those groups on the line, even when gay and lesbian is not the issue, with groups for civil rights, for people of color, for issues for women, all of the, particularly around economic injustice. We have to be out there making relationship, not just coalition, but making relationship by our going out and working so that we become more connected in a kind of an overall kind of civil rights movement. I believe that we're in a major civil rights movement that is not just gay and lesbian. I think we've had an ongoing civil rights movement since the 50s in this country, and that we are part of the legacy of that. We've sort of, I keep describing that as we've stepped into that river that flowed from African Americans from the 50s on, and women stepped into that river, and gay men and lesbians stepped into that river, and people with disabilities stepped into that river, and that we're very much connected in that, that it's about all of us. There's no separate kind of thing, but our piece of that, our tributary, or whatever it is, I don't know metaphorically exactly what that is, but this is a very great historical moment for us. We have not had a better time to talk to people about who we are. The words gay and lesbian are on the lips of everybody in this country this year. It was in every major piece of press that you could ask for, small press, large press. I know that from working with the press on the No on 9 campaign. This is the time. And I like the fact that they made their move too fast, too soon at the Republican convention when they tried to do their takeover.
And it didn't play in Peoria.
Came 4 years too soon, and it hurt them. I like that they've made their move in terms of these initiatives this year, that they didn't wait until they were more organized. For them to try for the first time in U.S. history to amend a constitution to take away rights rather than to extend them. This was very, very extraordinary. And for me, it was a signal that we're really moving into hardball here. We're moving into a new strategy, a dangerous strategy, and we're going to have to look at that in a different kind of way. We've got to be at the table, We can't be beggars at the table. We've got to go to the table strong. So we had to build our own organizations. But we had to be at the table when people talk civil rights. We had to be at the table when people talk bias crime. We have to be at the table when people talk human rights. We have to be at the table when people talk health care. We have to be at the table when they talk economic injustice.
What's the kind of support for gay and lesbian people among other movements? Is there are we welcome?
You know, I think we're as welcome in their movements as they are in ours. Our movement is identified as a white movement, even though it is not entirely a white movement, but it acts like a white movement. We just have to start. We just have to do it, and just move there as openly gay and lesbian people and do the work. Not because we say health is our issue necessarily. If somebody's fighting a health issue that doesn't even seem to ring true for what we need right now, if it's what they need, we could still go and put ourselves on the line. I think that's really possible, But I think we've got to not only defend ourselves from these assaults, but we have to take charge of the agenda and the public dialogue. And that's one of the things that I feel really, really strongly about. The religious right, at least since 1980, has been in charge of the public dialogue. And I'm ready to say no to that. Say, no, you don't get to define gay and lesbian issues. You don't get to say this is what our sexuality is. You don't get to say this is a lifestyle rather than sexual identity. You don't get to say that this is about the sexual abuse of children. We get to say who we are. We say what the agenda is. We say what the dialogue is. And when they shape the dialogue in that way, we say, no, we're going to reframe this issue. We're going to talk about this in this way because this is the reality. This is the truth for us, and you don't get to control that. We know that even though we won in Oregon, had a pretty good difference there, that had that been a candidate, it would have been a phenomenal landslide victory. But they, in a state in which every public voice spoke out against No. 9, still got 500,000 votes in a state that has fewer than 2.5 million people. They were able to build constituency. They were able to bring in money. They have a stronger organization now, and they're coming back in January.
Well, Mary, when Suzanne said they'll be back in January, she seemed pretty certain that this wasn't going to stop, that the right wing really had sort of an extended agenda about what to do. Do you think that's the case?
I think absolutely that's the case, and I think that's one reason why the struggle in Colorado is so important. What we've seen, and I've seen them for the last several years. I think we first saw Lou Sheldon in California with the Traditional Values Coalition threatening to circulate an initiative that would have prevented the state from adopting any kind of legislation. We then saw these local initiatives start to pop up, the one in Riverside, one in Portland, Oregon that never succeeded in getting on the ballot, one in Corvallis, Oregon, and one in Springfield, Oregon that actually was adopted. Another in Concord, California that was adopted and struck down, incidentally, just a month ago. And a number in the East as well, in Maine, in Tampa, Florida. We're seeing these pop up all over the place. And I think
and
Suzanne,
were they benign in a sense? I mean, Suzanne seemed to distinguish between, as though they were doing laboratory experiments by bringing a really egregious proposal in Oregon and one that looked a little better in Colorado. Are the ones that passed more like Colorado, where they only took away our rights and didn't say that we were, devils, or?
Yeah, I actually think there's a lot of similarity among these initiatives. They all seek to prevent lesbians and gays from achieving protective legislation as a bottom line. There is also a lot of variety in how they accomplish that, how directly they speak about it. And for instance, I think Suzanne's point was that in Oregon it was very explicit, very punitive, and offended a great many people. What Lon Mabon, the head of the Oregon Citizens Alliance, has announced is that, thank you, Colorado, you've shown us how to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's what Suzanne was talking about. They're going to come back and do it in Colorado.
It's pretty much like they've done with legislation in the various states about choice, where as the Supreme Court refined more and more the kinds of things that states could do, they've actually hired professional draftspersons to draft statutes for all the states, and I envision, I guess that's what the right wing is doing in this case.
I think that's a very good analogy, and it's not just an analogy to the legal efforts of the right wing, it's also the Operation Rescue type of tactics that are going on as well.
So the answer is, as it is with everything, at least you and I would agree, I think, organize, 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 in addition to coming out, which is really the first step to organizing. But Suzanne seemed to be very strong about how much we should align ourselves and ally ourselves with other movements, the larger civil rights movement. Do you think that's a good strategy? And if so, do you think there are any kind of barriers to that?
You know, I think it's a tremendously important strategy for us, and it's something that we as a community are just beginning to learn. This gay and lesbian civil rights movement is so young that we really are now, only now when people feel safe to come out, beginning to develop some kind of community identity. That presence, that visibility gives us the kind of ability to move into a civil rights mode and to join hands with other oppressed minorities. I think that we have so much in common with other oppressions. For instance, if you look at why people discriminate, it's mainly out of the individual person's prejudice and stereotypes against a particular group. That's something we all have in common. We're all fighting the prejudice and stereotypes, and we should be aware of that and join hands to do that. Of course there are impediments. There's a lot of misunderstanding across lines. I know that there's a lot of homophobia throughout the civil rights movement, and there's a lot of misunderstanding within our own community of what struggles other people are facing. And I think Suzanne was absolutely right. We have to join hands with them and offer our support and also recognize how our issues are similar and how we can help each other.
But don't they characterize us as different? I mean, I've heard even people in other movements and in our own movement talk about how we're sort of a different kind of minority. I think sometimes we're afraid to be identified with people of color or with poor women or people with disabilities because we don't see ourselves like that. I remember there was one forum I spoke at, and a man came to a microphone in the audience and said, you know, I can understand why people would discriminate against people, you know, minorities and women, but why us?
Well, that's a whole other show.
We were stunned.
It's actually shows, I think, that the blindness of that person to his own individual difference and that he is trying to pass within. And because of our ability to pass frequently, we don't experience discrimination quite as bluntly as some other minority groups do. However, as we become more visible, we're going to get that kind of discrimination. And plus, our discrimination comes from a different place. There is an association of our orientation and a presumption that we are just acting badly and can't behave ourselves. That kind of presumption has been used against us in the military struggle as well. And I think Colin Powell was the one who said, you know, being black is different than being gay. Gay is behavior related, and being black is a benign characteristic. That's missing the point. The discrimination coming from based on prejudice and stereotypes comes at people the same way. It's based on a fear of difference. And what we need to understand is that that fear of difference really is a misunderstanding also of what it means to be gay, what sexual orientation really is about. And I really think that through the process of education and through the process of coming out, we can eradicate that.
Well, one of the legal strategies that's been discussed in the terms of the whole equal protection notion is that the classifications that have been adopted for equal protection purposes generally have referred in the Supreme Court decisions to immutable characteristics, something you can't change, your color, your gender, whatever. And it's been confusing a little bit because half of us want to say, oh, we're born with this. It's very important to say we're born this way. We can't change it. It's just the way we are. Get used to it and give us our rights because we have immutable characteristics. And the other half of us say, I don't think that's a good way to characterize it because supposing it is a matter of choice, like religion, you wouldn't want to say to a Catholic, hey, I'm sorry you're being discriminated against. I'll tell you what, why don't you become a Protestant and everything will be fine. I mean, that's a matter of choice too, so that's not the point. Do you think it's important how we sort of characterize ourselves?
I think it's important for us to remind people that it doesn't matter how we got to be the way we are. I don't think anyone has any idea whether it's a biological trait, whether it's a psychological issue, and the research really isn't conclusive. What we need to understand is that prejudice and stereotypes have no place in our form of government and in our society.
Thanks. Well, we're going to talk more about Colorado and more about prejudice and stereotypes, and especially about the notion that we should or should not boycott the state of Colorado. We'll be right back after a minute.
Karen, hitting is wrong. You're bigger, you're stronger, you take time out and you don't hit. Do you understand?
Take time out. Don't take it out on your child.
Welcome back to Get Used to It. In this segment, we're going to talk about to boycott or not to boycott Colorado. Joining us here is David Smith, who, as I indicated, is the Executive Director of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, GLAAD, and David Bender, who is the Vice President of Operations for Wapello County Productions, which is Roseanne and Tom Arnold's production company, and David was also the Western Regional Director for the Human Rights Campaign Fund as one of his past avatars. So this should be fun. Sort of just to set the stage, there's been a lively debate in the press, in the community, in people's living rooms
During the
about
break.
what to do about this, because a boycott had been threatened. We told people in Oregon, you know, tell them if this passes in Oregon, we're going to boycott Oregon, we're going to boycott Colorado. However, we have a lot of friends in Colorado. We had a couple of cities that had ordinances that were favorable to us. So in the interest of this debate and bringing it to the audience, I want to ask you, David Smith. I know that GLAAD has taken a public position in favor of the boycott.
Correct.
And that you've been doing a lot of press about this and that you personally favor it. Why do you favor a boycott?
Well, we've not only been doing press, we've basically been organizing the entertainment industry, or attempting to organize the entertainment industry to support the boycott. I think it's important to look at the purpose for the boycott, why we feel it's necessary. First of all, a pressure that the boycott is applying right now on the state of Colorado is going to create an environment where Amendment 2 will fall as quickly as legally possible, whether that's by court action being struck down in court or by repeal of popular vote. The other reason for this boycott is to provide a deterrent for this type of initiative to pop up in other parts of the country. We know the religious right is on a rampage. The Traditional Values Coalition 700 Club, there's an organized network of the religious right that smells blood with this victory as far as Colorado is concerned, and they're going to try and replicate it to other parts of the country. This boycott is already having a major impact. It's already working, you know, as far as the discussion, is it working or is it not? It is.
When you say it's working, you mean people are boycotting?
Correct. There's $16 million trackable dollars have been pulled out of the state of Colorado to date as a result of the boycott. And that doesn't mention all of the personal holidays, vacation plans, that sort of thing that have been changed. It's making a substantial impact. It's also pushed it to the national stage. It's put the national spotlight on what Amendment 2 is. You know, you said that it limited civil rights for gay men and lesbians, and it absolutely prohibits civil rights. It's an absolute atrocity, and I think this message is slowly but surely getting out to the entire country.
David Bender, you don't agree that the boycott is the right answer to this. Tell us how you feel.
Well, I don't agree, and I think the problem we have is one of tactics and strategy, and I applaud what GLAAD's been doing, because they've been in the forefront of organizing our community, and I think that is a very important reaction to what's happened in Colorado, which is a disgrace and which is something that needs to be opposed at every level. The issue, in my view, is not whether we oppose it, it is how and how we do it effectively, and David points out that, you know, there is an effect from the boycott. We're discussing it here now, and it's being discussed around the country. That is a positive effect, no question. I think that the problem we have is that we weren't expecting to lose in Colorado. I think the Colorado campaign was, with all respect to people who put effort into it, not well thought through. I think in contrast to Oregon, where there was a very carefully constructed campaign strategy, I think Colorado was not prepared for the assault of the right wing at the end of the campaign, and I think that they were in being unprepared, unable to organize the kind of opposition to the propaganda that the right wing and the religious right wing are putting out, not only in Colorado but across the country. What I see is missing from a boycott is the kind of education which Mary's talked about. I think that one of the things that we have to do as gay men and lesbians is to go to Colorado. And it's a very different view. We have to go to Colorado Springs. We have to go to the areas that voted against. Now Denver, Boulder, Aspen supported our position. They voted against Amendment 2. These are the communities that are going to be hit hardest by this boycott. Now, it is true, as was the case in South Africa, that friends will suffer in the cause of justice and trying to redress the wrong that has been done. But I'm not sure, in this case, that the very people we're trying to pressure, the people in rural Colorado, the people in Colorado Springs, are going to feel the kind of pressure that we want to apply. I see it's going to affect our friends, and that's strategically and tactically, that's the first problem I have with this.
Well, this has been always, I think, the problem with a boycott is that when you talk, David Smith, about the larger stage, and I think when Mary and I were talking earlier, it's about, there is a kind of education in saying, you do this to us, we don't come to your state, period. But in terms of the state of Colorado itself, what I hear you saying is that even the people who might favor a boycott will simply put up with it. It isn't as though they're getting educated about it. It's a kind of a punishment tool and a way of setting a national agenda that says, this is how we're going to respond to these kinds of moves against us. We're going to punish the state. And I'm sorry about the people that, wanted to work with us, and I'm sorry about gay and lesbian people there, and I'm sorry about Denver and Aspen, but we've got to keep our word, or else they'll say in the right wing, hey, look, they're not serious, they won't do anything to us.
I don't think, first of all, I think a byproduct of the boycott effort has been education. I think that we're not only sending the message that, we are politically powerful in this country, we have come into our own politically, but we are also communicating some of the essence of what you and Mary discussed earlier. Some of the core discussions about who we are as people is getting out there as a result of this. So I do believe there is an education effort. But this boycott effort is not punitive. It's not punishment. It is a political strategy to affect social change. And the boycott that has precedence here, I believe, or is similar, is the one in Arizona, where legislators refused to adopt Martin Luther King's birthday as a national holiday. And the ensuing boycott, which cost the state $500 million, quickly changed their mind. That short-term harm, and there's clearly African Americans living in Arizona, created long-term positive social change. There is historical precedent for this, and I think we are coming into our own politically and are exercising our political muscle. And again, the African American civil rights movement has shown us the way.
Well, and I think that's a fair point, that Arizona did see a change, but you had something very different in Arizona. You had a governor who was vehemently opposed to the Martin Luther King holiday. And what we see in Colorado is the governor, the mayor, all of the leaders, virtually all the political leaders who are supportive of our efforts to overturn Amendment 2. And I think you're talking, and this is the distinction here, when we're trying to apply political pressure, the question of strategy and tactics, I agree that if our community has gone on record as saying there's going to be a boycott, then it's important to show solidarity, and that it's difficult once that threat's been made to not back it up with support. And it's heartening to see a lot of the support, not only in the gay and lesbian community, but across the board, from friends and allies, Atlanta, the city of New York, that are supporting this. But I question very seriously whether or not we are going to achieve the political result we want. And the second part of that, what we talked about first was education. The second part is, if this goes back to a ballot initiative, if the courts do not overturn it, then we are looking at another political fight with the electorate in Colorado. And one of the things that we've seen in political struggles is that individual states really resent outsiders coming in and telling them how to vote. We saw that in Oregon. We've seen that all across the country, and it's a very potentially dangerous backlash that if this is a political fight, and if this goes before the voters again next November, if we overplay this hand and overplay the sense that we as the country are condemning the voters of Colorado, I suspect, and I agree with Mary, I think if it were on the ballot today, it might not pass. But I'm not at all sure, if this boycott goes forward, that we're not going to set up the very response that we least desire and have a backlash at the polls in November of '93. And that's a concern I have.
Hey, could I just be a little vicious here? And I don't
Only
mean,
a little.
I'll just be a little vicious.
But not
but
to David.
I think it's an important point, at least, to discuss. And I know Mayor Wellington Webb is supportive of our cause, and he should be applauded for that, and the governor. But where were these people prior to Amendment 2, winning? I mean, and I know that they've been supportive. I know he led the effort, but he certainly didn't go on a national talk show tour bringing attention to Amendment 2, in the state of Colorado. The amount of energy that's being exerted by Colorado to try and kibosh this boycott, is staggering. If this sort of energy was enacted prior to the election, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this. We'd be talking about more important things. I think that the fact is that what happened in Colorado is the passage of Amendment 2 in Colorado is the first time a state in this union since Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation where a state has identified a class of its people specifically to deny them civil rights. I think this is absolutely horrendous, and I don't think we should sit back and be complacent. I think not one gay or lesbian person or a friend should be complacent because Bill Clinton's in the White House. We have a friendly administration in Washington. I think the religious right is after our civil rights. They've clearly targeted us, and I think we should do everything we possibly can to defend ourselves.
We used the analogy before of Arizona, and I would rather think that we could look back to the analogy of the South. And in the 60s, when similar kinds of actions were being taken to deprive African Americans of their liberties, instead of boycotting, although there were boycotts by African Americans who wouldn't ride the bus, but you also had Rosa Parks who got on the bus. You also, and didn't move. You also had people who sat at the lunch counters, and you had people who came in from all around the country and said, we don't believe this is right. And you had white people and black people arm in arm, as there can be gay and lesbian and straight people arm in arm, going into Colorado to make the point that this is wrong, and that the only way we're going to change it is to get in people's faces and make it clear that we are here to stay, and they have to get used to it.
This is one of the conundrums about having a movement. You know, because I know that we've talked a lot in our community, even here in LA, about having these varying points of view on, name it, you know, what to do when Wilson vetoes AB 101.
Take to the
what
streets.
To do when he doesn't veto, you know, et cetera, right? And we have these discussions, and we're trying to figure out how do we agree or disagree with each other, how do we have a panoply of approaches. And I guess the question comes down to, what does it mean to have a movement? You talk about strategy and tactics. Supposing the movement says, and who knows who the movement is, the boycott is the way we're going to go. Do we then criticize everyone who doesn't adhere to it? Because we've got this strategy, and everybody that doesn't do it is undermining the strategy or the movement. You know, I mean, we set ourselves
that's
up.
a difficult problem.
But it's not only about boycott. It's really about notions of strategy across the board.
I think you bring up an excellent point as it relates to this particular action against Colorado, is that I think many different options are surfacing on how to battle what happened there. And I think while I firmly believe a boycott is the answer, and I think it is having impact, and I think it is going to affect positive social change, I think other efforts are surfacing where people could sign up on. I know that people are talking about a national education campaign. I know that people, Mary, you know, the Colorado Legal Initiative Project, which is challenging its legality or its constitutionality. There are other things that are surfacing, and I think that we can disagree on how best to attack this problem, just as long as we get involved.
Well,
that's the
also,
bottom line.
But the choices are also somewhat contiguous. I mean, when you were talking, David, about the South and how there was a bus boycott, but at the same time, you know, when the Freedom Riders were there, or people registering people to vote.
Absolutely.
The whole notion, however, of each of those actions was not just to go and ski and spend money, was not to help the state. It was to help the movement within the state, so that maybe when we're trying to judge what actions are appropriate with Colorado in addition to boycott, which we seem to have agreed generally that we're going to do it, and a lot of people are supporting it. For instance, I know Rosie and Tom want to go to Colorado Springs and do something in order to sort of be in their face about this stuff. But
they have a connection. Roseanne has lived in Colorado Springs. They feel that, you know, and both of them have performed there over the years, they feel that by going into an area which voted for Amendment 2, where clearly there needs to be some effort at education, they can do more good than staying away. And that's a judgment they've made, and I happen to agree with it. It is in contrast to a call for a boycott, but I think that the difficulty I have with the call for a community-wide decision is that it is hard to understand who the community is. I know that even in Colorado there's disagreement between gay and lesbian groups over whether a boycott is appropriate. The task force has not yet decided whether it supports a boycott or not. You have honest disagreement on this. When we, however, put forward a position as a community, and this is where, when that line gets crossed, it's hard to back over it. You need to show solidarity, and I'm very clear about that. I think that it's important that the boycott not fail once it's been called either. And having said that, I still support going into Colorado and working for education, but I think clearly the effects that David's talking about are beginning to be felt by a lot of groups you wouldn't have expected.
Well, let me ask Mary, though, for a second.
Can I say one thing real quick? I think it's important for me to say that I wouldn't criticize you or Roseanne and Tom for going into Colorado, because at least you want to do something about it. They want to do something about Amendment 2. They recognize it as a threat. But it's the people that are sitting back and not doing anything that I would be more
Just
likely
going
to
to their
criticize.
dentist conventions or whatever. I'm
Exactly.
sorry for all the dentists out there. They're not going to Colorado. One of the things that David Smith said, Mary, was that he thought that the boycott helps sort of push the case along, that we might get a quicker, more favorable kind of overturning either in the court or a new vote or whatever. Do you think that's the case?
Well, I think that it's really a mistake to presume that a judge is going to be influenced greatly by the hoo-ha that goes around in the media. But at the same point, I think what's happening is a tremendous amount of public education, and what is a legally relevant consideration is the cities of Aspen in particular, Boulder and Denver, are experiencing financial harm the longer that this goes on. And it has been a direct consequence of the initiative passing. That is inevitably a consideration when a court is deciding whether or not to enjoin an initiative and prevent its enforcement. I think it's a mistake, though, to presume that the judge is not going to do it according to the law. And that's why I think it's very important to have a dual approach. One is a legal approach that tries to show and articulate why this is wrong, and another that contributes to the public debate and the public education.
See, the fun difference between you and I is, I mean, you are a lawyer and you're very legal, but see, I get to kind of embellish.
It'd be kind of illegal.
That's not true. I don't embellish, but I can kind of. I mean, I really do think that we are creating an environment in Colorado where this is going to be hastened, whether it's in the court or, I mean, I obviously can't say a judge is going to make a decision quicker because of this, but the entire environment is going to create Amendment 2 falling much quicker.
Well, the shoe is pinching. That. I mean, there's no question about it, that people are constantly feeling the results of it.
But Sheila, the question, which people are feeling the results of it? And this is something I posed before, and I haven't really heard the answer to. We know that Aspen's feeling it, and Aspen had voted, I think it was 3-1 against Amendment 2. Denver's feeling it. That was a 60% vote against Amendment 2. But Colorado Springs is not, it seems to me, feeling it. And the rural parts of the state are not feeling it. My analogy would be if there were a boycott of California for similar legislation having passed, this would be like penalizing San Francisco to affect something that Orange County had overwhelmingly supported. I think that we're not yet seeing the economic pressure on the very people we would like to be affecting.
That's one of the arguments that the gay and lesbian community was articulating to us in Los Angeles for opposing a boycott, was that what you're doing is actually purging the state of gay supportive people who in fact, what you need are, and Colorado Springs is the heart of the Christian right wing in Colorado, you need to go and do an encampment in Colorado Springs. That may be a temporal issue. It may be that that may be the strategy to, should we not achieve the kind of legal success we're looking at, then to do something like that.
I know the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, which is based in Denver, has their national, and that no one is more politically correct than the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and they're very worried because they can't cancel their contracts. So what they've decided to do is what they did a year past in Atlanta, which is to bring everything with them into the state, not to spend a dime, you know, to leave lots of trash, but not to, in essence, leave any good. But again, it's a punishment of Denver and maybe not the right way to go.
I think Colorado Springs is starting to feel the effects of it. A couple of major conferences were pulled out of there, and if the Conference of Mayors this June is pulled out of there, that's going to be substantial. But I think Aspen is the victim of a zealous media who loves to cover celebrities. Whenever you have celebrities, you get more attention. It's more because it's part of our popular culture. And I think there's such a connection with Aspen and celebrities. It's getting all the attention right now. And I think that's unfortunate because Aspen is being singled out unfairly, and I do believe that. But this boycott is statewide. It's not singling any part out or trying to hurt Denver or Aspen more than any other place.
Well, you know, we could talk about this for a very long time, and I'm sure you're very surprised to know that we've been talking about it for 20 minutes and probably wouldn't resolve it if we talked another 60. So I'd like to thank you, David and Mary, very much for joining me today, this month. And thank you very much for joining us, and we hope that you'll stick with us and get used to it.